8:50. OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. Now, Alan Quinlan is with us. Alan, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, Ger. How are you?
Oh, we're delighted that we get to talk about the laws of the game again and again and again and again and again. Owen's been trying to defend them wholeheartedly here. He's a fully paid up member of the Illicadoos Club that's like, no, the laws are perfect. How else are we going to stop cheats from cheating if we don't make laws like this? But maybe when you make a law, you're supposed to think through what the repercussions of it might be.
Yeah, I think when the law changed, it was obviously done to stop teams who were getting dominated in their scrums from cheating and faking injuries and taking off their props, and then their scrum wouldn't be getting pushed backwards, and that they could possibly win the game and take away that advantage from the opposition. So the reason this law change came in, that if you end up with a couple of props going off injured or front row players, and the players that come on, another one goes off, and you have to have uncontested scrums, that if it goes to that situation, that you have to reduce the number of players in the field and take another player off. So it's to stop teams from doing that. Obviously, if it happens in a game, well, because it's an uncontested scrum, you're taking away one of the big strengths of the opposition. If they are dominating you, it tries to change that. These circumstances, the circumstances that happened yesterday, are kind of unprecedented. When you have Lucchesi, the Italian hooker, starting hooker, he goes off with a dislocated elbow. Then Aviva gets sent off. I think a change in the law, or a tweak in the law that's been brought in to stop the cheating, would be to give the discretion to the referee. In other words, these are exceptional circumstances. He's seen a player go off with a dislocated elbow. He's sent off the other player. So can he have discretion there and allow them to not reduce the number of players? People have said that to me yesterday, but then if he does that...
Does he have discretion to allow them to have contested scrums? Is it automatic that you can't have contested scrums?
This is the problem. No, it's not. The law would allow you to have contested scrums. Neymar came on the field yesterday, the sub-Italian prop. Italy would have had to say, I'm happy to play hooker and have contested scrums with their captain Campanaro, and actually argue that point out with the referee and say, no, we're fine, he's fine, and we want to have contested scrums. And I was surprised that, like, they did try and argue that a little bit.
But the captain seemed to be trying that, but it seemed like the referee was saying, no, I can't be any more clear.
That's what I thought, that he was dismissing it. If the law would allow, if Italy wanted to put him in as a hooker and say, we want full contested scrums and normality here, they wouldn't have had to reduce the player. They didn't argue that point strong enough, and that was an issue. Maybe it was down to the language barrier or not being able to translate that question, that point across. But I was surprised that they didn't, because the law does allow you, if you can bring the player on, and it's not about nominating before the game, it's about saying the player who came on himself, I've played hooker before, I can play here, no problem. And that didn't happen, which was a shame, because look, the crowd, the atmosphere, everything just seeped out of the stadium after that, and it was a kind of farcical situation. At one stage, and I think 75 minutes, Bram Stein was sin-binned as well, so they were down to 12 players, which was, it's a shame, really. I think Ireland would have wanted to kind of been, and would have expected to be 30 points up in midway through the second half. That's what they were up. I think it was 36-6 and at one stage, and obviously they were playing with 13 players. So what went wrong for Ireland? Why didn't they score more points? I think mentally they kind of switched off a little bit as well and lost their focus. So it was a kind of a farcical situation. But the law that's there is there for a reason. And this is really important that people understand. The teams have exploited that situation before when their scrum has been under pressure. They're winning in a game and they're trying to, fake injuries to take away dominance from the opposition scrum. If you get to that situation,
But
you've got to take a player off.
That's fine, right? But there should be a different scenario where if you're taking out somebody from the front row because of a red card, the red card then automatically is a double punishment, and that makes no sense in any sport ever to punish two players for the same incident.
The circumstances are different, so
it's not entirely unprecedented. Like you can game this through and go, well, what happens if it's a red card? Well, in that case, actually, that's different. We've enforced, some foul play has occurred, and to send two players off for the same foul play doesn't make any sense. Like that, they haven't cheated in this instance. There's a difference.
Correct. And that's what I was talking about, having discretion, and the referee actually saying, and maybe tweaking that law to say that, look, if there is a red card, they haven't taken somebody off, or somebody's not, got an injury there, a legitimate injury, because the first one was a legitimate injury. Lucchese went off with a dislocated elbow, then it's a red card. So maybe that's what needs to happen now, that if there's a red card involved in this. But then, there's a punishment. It's a double punishment. They've already lost the player.
Yeah.
And I think it's harsh. It's
and no one's going to get a red card. No one's going to get a red card on purpose. There's no team's going to go, we're going to get this guy sent off so we can go to uncontested scrums. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how the teams are cheating. It's like they didn't bother thinking this through to the end. Well, what if it's a red card where somebody goes off? It's like, oh, well, look, sure.
Yeah, when the law was brought in, it was down to props getting, or hookers getting injured, or faking injury. And it going to uncontested scrum. And look, if a team ended up with uncontested scrums, the probability is this doesn't happen till maybe the 60th or 70th minute. Do you know what I mean? If guys are getting injured, that's probably the reality. So if you to play the last 10 or 15 minutes with 14 men, you're not really going to be going crazy over that if the law was adopted in for the reason it's brought in. But because it happened so early yesterday, and because there's the red card, and again, probably debate around the red card a little bit. I'm probably fairly close to zero tolerance on the high hits. But part of me just felt sorry for Aviva yesterday. But your letter to law situation, again, it was a red card. Some argue that maybe it was a little bit harsh. I think if he gave a yellow for that yesterday, it was one of those ones where if the referee gives a yellow, Ireland are not going to be up in arms after the game over it. But it just made it a whole farcical situation. And it was a shame, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. In terms of the injuries, Andrew Porter went off with an ankle injury, and they took him off really quickly because obviously you don't want to take any risk for it. But if he was to be missing, if Robbie Henshaw has a HIA, afterwards they said he looked fine, he'll go through the protocols, but he should be available. Is there anything we learned about selection? Is it automatic Sexton starts now against England? The consensus afterwards seemed to be that Joey Carbery didn't do enough.
Yeah, that's the reality. I think it didn't suit Carbery either, because I think if Ireland were playing against 15, I think they would have played a lot better, and they would have been a lot more energetic and a lot more conscious of sending numbers to the breakdown. You saw Ireland had 4 or 5 penalties against them at the breakdown, which was kind of alarming in a sense that a team with 13 players can do that to them. But for me, that says it's a mental thing. It's players who probably didn't feel the panic or the fear, the need to get into the breakdown quicker with players carrying the ball. Lots of players probably standing off, looking for space, hoping to get line breaks, hoping to get the ball in their hands. And that seeps right across the team. So, Carbery, the game just got very, very kind of loose, and Ireland seemed to lose their focus. When Sexton came on, there seemed to be a bit of a change. It was like, this is how we're doing it. This is where we're going to attack. And I'm laying down the law here. And obviously he can do that with authority and experience. Much better.
I accept that it looks different, but it was against 13 men Italians who were absolutely exhausted after an hour, where you would expect whoever's coming off the bench to have a bit of an impact. So I just want to cool the jets on that. It was one of his all-time great Ireland performances.
I agree with you as well. It was disjointed from all the players, I think, and that was a shame for Carbery as well, because I think the feeling, and a lot of the players said it, they would have probably preferred And we shouldn't kind of be feeling sorry for the Italians here, you know, I think. But the reality is Ireland probably would have played better if there was more players. That sounds crazy, because if you have a numerical advantage in games, you should be exploiting the opposition and the space more. But you can imagine if you're an Italian player there, Ger, it's pure desperation, and it really kind of, your mind should be focused anyway, but absolutely desperation to hang on and scramble, defend, and just really dig in. And they showed a lot of steel and grit in doing that. And then the flip side of that, Ireland just got a little bit, lost their focus a little bit, lost their shape, and probably expected it to happen a little bit. And that was evident at the breakdown for me, because Ireland shouldn't get turned over 4 or 5 times at the breakdown, even against the top teams in the world. You know, you're always going to get caught a couple of times in a game. Campanaro, the back row, the open side, the captain was brilliant. Lamaro, I should say, was absolutely brilliant in his performances. I don't know why I'm calling him Campanaro. I think it's Lamaro. And I was so impressed with him yesterday. He was an absolutely, outstanding player. But it was kind of a frustrating one for Ireland, wasn't it?
What about England then? Excellent in parts, control the game, but not particularly efficient with the control they had. Allowed Wales to get a sniff at the end, even though Wales weren't really in the game at all. So what to make of that performance?
It's difficult, because Wales have improved, obviously, from that first game against Ireland. England were quite blunt and not really sure between their power game and their attack game where they're at, really, you know, with the players Eddie Jones has introduced and the type of game they're trying to play. I think they were fortunate in the end and pretty relieved to be hanging on against Wales, who reacted and were magnificent probably for the last 20, 30 minutes of the game and could have possibly won it. England weren't great. And it's hard to judge it, as I said, because Wales improved a lot, but you know, for the try that England scored, just I think they were fortunate there in that line out. Itoje holds down the lifters, and the ball goes over the back, and they score from that, and that's probably the game really for England. And they kicked a lot. Their attack wasn't fluid like we expected. So I don't know, it's hard to judge them, but on the evidence of what we saw at the weekend and what we've seen so far from England, a very, very risky thing to say. I'd be confident with Ireland going to Twickenham.
Like, this is it's been an interesting couple of years. Like, if we look at, say, England coming to a nice peak for the World Cup, and this kind of expectation that we're going through at the moment that England are going to be fine next year, and if you're an English rugby supporter, you can expect this 18 months to be a constant upward trajectory. Like, in the aftermath of the game on Saturday, he was talking about the limitless potential of his attack. It's got no ceiling, was his reference to his attack. Like, he referred to his team potentially becoming the greatest team of all time 2 years ago. Like, I mean, Eddie Jones obviously talks quite a big game, as we all know, but it seems that even some of the terms that he's using about this England team are even a bit OTT from Eddie Jones himself. So what's the reasoning behind that, and is there any credence to it at all, do you think?
I don't know. I obviously those comments were made, and you know, people set goals, and sometimes as Irish people were nervous about kind of shooting for the stars and saying it openly. He openly said that yes, they want to be the best team in the world and dominate and be the greatest team ever. They had probably potential to be and reason to be aiming that high, given where they were, you know, at the World Cup and the performance against New Zealand. And if they won a World Cup, they would have been on the road to do that. There's been a lot of change in the team. The Vunipola brothers gone. Manu Tuolangi was obviously, you know, can be a world-class player when he's fit and available. And the depth chart that England can always kind of produce would enable them to be one of the top teams in the world continuously and be up thereabouts. But I just don't think they know what they're doing at the moment. There's been so many changes in the coaching. team, coaches walking out, not wanting to work under Eddie Jones, stuff like that. I'm not sure where they're at. There's some very, very good young players. Stewart at full back is huge potential. He's big, physical, athletic player who's can be brilliant and can really improve. They've had a lot of injuries, but I just don't know where England are. Like it was a terrible, terrible game to watch on Saturday. From particularly that first half, it was blunt, and maybe both teams were cancelling each other out. But I just think England are a team that are not really sure what their best option is at the moment, whether it's power, whether it's attack. And that was pretty evident on Saturday.
What do you think it is? Like, what is the best version of England?
I don't know, Owen, because, you know, the way they would have... When you play England, and back to when I was playing, you always fear about the power and the aggression up front and the physicality. And I'm not saying that they're not physical. You know, they are very physical. Genge and Itoje and even Dombrent's coming in there. He offers them a lot in attack and defence, and he's a big athletic player. But they're not overly dominant up front against teams at the moment. And then they're lacking a little bit of penetration, that backline. I don't know, have they any sort of X factor? Marcus Smith at out half is very, very talented, but he's a bit like Joey Carberry in a sense that there's still a gap between him and what Owen Farrell has brought to England in the last number of years. Real steel, resolve. And I just watched Wales players continuously running into his channel and in the second half on Saturday and getting 5, 6, 7, 8 yards over the game line. And when you do that against the opposition, well, then it's very hard to defend infield when you're getting over the game line so much. One of England's big strengths in the last number of years, and probably continuously, has been stopping people on the game line, overpowering them, putting pressure to break down, and just, you know, you're struggling to play against them then because you're on the back foot. But they're not really doing that against teams at the moment. So maybe we're being too harsh and too critical that they are in this major transition, that maybe Eddie Jones doesn't mind that they're going through this period. But, you know, an English team at home in Twickenham, you'd think they'd be a little bit more dominant. I don't think they were at major risk of losing the game. They controlled it pretty well, but it was blunt and it was hard to watch at times on Saturday.
Having said all that, and having said that you can feel pretty confident about us going to Twickenham, we have not used this as a testing ground for new players or for anything other than trying to win the competition. So if we were to go to Twickenham and lose, it will be fairly devastating to the current...
I don't think it would. I don't think so.
But why not? Like if we're picking our best team, we're trying to win.
Andy Farrell has probably capped up on 20 players since he's come in. I don't think
he's not playing a lot of those in this competition. Like, so Larry played yesterday. Larry's not going to start. Keenan's going to start. We know that. Mac Hansen has come in, and that's really the only player who's come in. And maybe Mac Hansen starts, maybe he doesn't. Maybe James Lowe starts instead of him. Like, it's a first choice team that we'll be going to England, where you don't really feel like England have evolved to the point yet. They're in transition. Like, we have to have high standards of ourselves, surely. We have to demand a win from our best team versus their kind of working things out team.
100%. Yeah, that's the point. I think you can't. There's no way you can go to Twickenham and experiment, because Ireland need to win this game. They need to try and challenge and win the championship as well, bring it to the last day. You know, the World Cup is the World Cup in 18 months' time. I think you can't just... There may be one or two positions where there's a little bit of a chance taken on certain players, but you can't go to Twickenham and completely experiment. And I think, look, my point about the players he's capped, he's built a lot of depth in this team. Look at the Ireland performance 2 weeks ago in Paris, making some mistakes, getting some kind of things wrong, tactical things, couple of decisions that went against him, particularly around the line-out, and they lost 6-0 against France, who totally overpowered Scotland at the weekend and are setting themselves up nicely, and it's hard to see anyone stopping him. You know, I thought Scotland might have a chance the weekend. we now have to think maybe Cardiff. It might be tricky for them in Cardiff, which it will be, but or England may do us a favour in the end. But Ireland have made under Andy Farrell, he's done really, really well to start getting some depth in there. Obviously, the Carberry situation yesterday, people would have loved that. If he got a lot more game time and played better. The circumstances were crazy. I think he played okay. It wasn't that he had a bad game, but it was just a flat performance, probably from him and his teammates against 13 men. And there is a fair bit of depth in certain positions. The second row is an area that would probably concern me, and I've said that a few times.
Yeah.
That there is a bit more depth found there, but you can't just invent players. I think where Ireland at the moment are pretty good, and I think they're well capable. If they lose in Twickenham, going back to your point, yeah, well, is it a disaster? I don't think so, because we've seen a lot of new faces in the last 18 months.
All right, we'll leave it there. We'll come back to that. Plenty of time to build up to that one, Alan. Good stuff. Thanks a million. It's Alan Quinlan.
Cheers. Thanks, lads.
Giving us his thoughts.